Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee will come to order. Today's hearing is in the hybrid format. Our witness, of course, is in person. Members have the option to appear either way. We welcome the Chair of the Federal Reserve, has recently been confirmed for a second term and has, this is his first hearing since then. We've seen the fastest growth in decades, faster even than China's, the lowest unemployment levels in 50 years. When Americans see the price of gas and groceries and rent going up week after week, available jobs and long-awaited wage gains don't mean as much and don't go as far. American families have been through enough the past 2 years, but for most people, it's not just the past 2 years that have been tough. Our economy hasn't worked for most Americans for far too long. Whether it's war or disease or financial crisis or sweeping over all of it, the march of globalization, workers and their families always bear the biggest burden, whether it's in the form of higher prices or lost jobs or low wages or devastation to their community or all of the above. It's not inevitable. The economy isn't physics. The ghost of Adam Smith would not recognize America today. There is no invisible hand of the market. When prices go up, it's because someone made a choice to raise them. In corporate boardrooms, when supply chains slow down or input costs go up or resources become scarce, executives make decisions. Do we cut back on bonuses? Do we rethink our stock buyback plan? Do we forego executive raises this year? Do we post quarterly profits that are still higher than last year, but maybe not quite as high as analysts thought they could be? Or do we raise prices and foist all the negative consequences of world events onto the people who can least afford them? We know what, in this country, most corporations do. They make the same choice they've always made, no matter the economic conditions of the moment. Most of these executives, they're not bad people. They're just doing their jobs, they tell us. It's the Wall Street system. These executives have to post profit increases for their shareholders quarter after quarter after quarter. The consequences for everything else be damned, and everyone else be damned. It's why for decades Wall Street's rewarded the companies that squeeze their workers the hardest, companies that cut wages and retirement benefits, then cut corners on worker safety and on consumer protection just to make their stock prices go up. It's why too many companies fail to invest in their workers or their products. It's why companies moved manufacturing overseas and then neglected the supply chains that have been crippled during the pandemic, contributing mightily to inflation. It's why big corporations, Amazon, Starbucks, why they bust unions. It's why oil and gas companies would rather charge higher prices than increase supply to meet demand. We aren't witnessing traditional inflation. We're watching Russia and OPEC drive up prices and American energy companies engage in wartime profiteering. At the root of the higher prices and the empty shelves are the same problem that's been shipping jobs overseas and keeping wages low for decades, from Nevada to Massachusetts to Ohio. Corporate power, concentration reaching into every industry and market, into every corner of the economy. Our economy doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where Wall Street wins, everyone else loses. We can create an economy that reflects our values and works for everyone. We passed the American Rescue Plan, including the child tax credit, the biggest tax cut for working families ever. And despite what naysayers claim, of course it wasn't the cause for inflation. For the American families that I talked to, it empowered them to keep up with the cost of raising children. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, a long-term investment in economic growth that creates more jobs, strengthens supply chains, improves our bridges and roads and public transit. Last week, President Biden signed the Bipartisan Ocean Shipping Reform Act into law, bringing down ocean shipping supply chain costs. We need to build on these successes to build an economy that rewards work, making things in America. We should pass our Supply Chain Resiliency Act and begin to bring manufacturing back to our country. We should bring down the cost of prescription drugs and housing and child care and elder care and other costs that have been rising for decades. We need to pass the Protecting the Right to Organize Act to empower workers in the workplace and our economy so they actually get their fair share. We need to crack down on corporate concentration and consolidation. Fair competition is good for workers and consumers and Main Street businesses. It's a core American value. It's how we bring costs down and ensure that workers don't always pay the price for powerful people's bad decisions, whether it's a dictator in Eastern Europe or a Wall Street executive. In a truly fair economy, people don't have to choose between two bad options, low wages or high prices. No one likes inflation. People want good jobs that pay a living wage. Americans want to work. They want to work with dignity. That's central to the functioning of our economy. And as Chair Powell knows, it's part of the Fed's mandate. We must continue to power workers and strengthen the labor market. Wages are clearly not responsible for inflation now. We can't forget that almost 6 million people are still looking for work, actual workers behind the numbers whose livelihoods are directly affected by the decisions the Fed makes. And as interest rates rise and financial stability risks increase, it's even more important to keep a close watch on the biggest banks so that excessive risk-taking doesn't create even more problems. Banks must have enough capital to withstand a crisis. They must serve their communities, not just enrich themselves with stock buybacks and exorbitant executive pay. And mergers must benefit the local community, not just shareholders. We've seen too much evidence of big Wall Street banks behaving badly, shunning small businesses, raking in billions in overdraft fees, discriminating all too often against black and brown borrowers. Chair Powell, you must also ensure we have a strong payment system that works for Main Street banks and consumers so people don't feel like the only option is a risky and unregulated alternative financial system backed by nothing but empty promises. The thousands of proxy currencies like stablecoin and other digital assets, they promise transparency that promise transparency and democracy are missing one thing. They aren't backed by the full faith and credit of the United States of America. The Federal Reserve, our nation's central bank, must use its authority to protect consumers and the financial system from these risks. And you, Mr. Chair, must ensure that the Fed has the highest ethical standards. After former Fed officials profited off their positions in last year's stock trading scandal, it's up to you to restore the American people's and us to restore the American people's trust in this institution that's critical for a healthy economy. I was encouraged when you updated the Fed's policies, but we need rules that have the force of law. That's why we need to pass my Ban Conflicted Trading at the Fed Act. As chair of the Federal Reserve, you have an important role to play to make sure our economy works for everyone, not just those at the top. I urge you to remember the millions of working Americans who are counting on you. I will turn to today's ranking member, Mr. Tillis from North Carolina, and then Chair Powell. And the first questioner will be Senator Warren, who has another engagement. Plus, it's her birthday, so every time birthday she gets to go first if she has. And I have to introduce a judicial candidate in judiciary, so I may have to step out. Your 80th birthday today, Senator Kennedy?